Sakuna of Rice and Ruin from developers Edelweiss and publishers Marvelous and Xseed is something of a weird game. It's a game I had my eye on with cautious optimism since it was first revealed, but never really realized just how different it was going to be. At least different in parts. See, Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is made up of two distinctly different gameplay loops. You have your hack and slash action combat and your rice farming. Where other games with farming mechanics have you growing all manner of crops, Sakuna goes against, or rather with the grain, so to speak, and has you grow rice. Only rice. But this isn't your average vanilla rice baby. There's so much to this one task that a lot of other farming sim games feel far less involved by comparison. In a way, due to the absurdity of some of its mechanical depth, this almost feels like a Kickstarter game that just turned out really well. Like, no single entity or corporation in their right mind would sign off on a game like this. But then again, somebody did. And I'm certainly glad they did. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tarks Gauntlet Sakuna Reviewna. If you're new around here and you like what you see, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. If you're a returning subscriber, as always, it's rice to see you back. Now, before we get into all of this game's crazy rice farming mechanics, let's start with something a lot more simple: the story. We begin with a group of 5 weary mortals crossing a bridge from the lowly realm to the lofty realm, the realm of gods. Whilst in the lofty realm, these weary and very, very hungry mortals spot a stockpile of rice and help themselves. This rice, however, is meant as an offering to one of the goddesses who presides over the lofty realm. And when these mortals are caught by our titular drunken goddess Sakuna, a comedy of errors ensues, leading to the offering being destroyed. As punishment, the mortals, along with the equally responsible Sakuna, are banished from the lofty realm to a little spit of land inhabited by demons. Coping with profound guilt and an overwhelming defeatist mentality, Sakuna and company have no choice but to start over, to learn to fend for themselves, to live off the land and the skills each of them possesses. From here, plot developments are few and far between, but this mostly works to the game's favor. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin takes more of a Kelly Reichardt approach to its storytelling, focusing more on putting you in the world, letting you absorb the lifestyle, the flow of time, and just the way of things. The difference between this and a Kelly Reichardt film, however, is that this isn't boring as fuck. Actually being a participant of the setting rather than just being an observer makes a lot of difference. Your goal most of the time is just to raise your exploration rank by visiting these platforming hack and slash driven stages. Raising your rank will cause new areas to unlock, and after so long, a new story event will unfold. It's not until Act 3, the final act of the game, where things get a lot more story focused, but despite how interesting the story gets, the quest objectives around that point actually get significantly worse, feeling like rather poor JRPG style padding. But it's not like all of your time is spent exploring or farming. The game does offer a multitude of character interactions and optional events and quests to tide you over. One of my favorite parts of the game is just mealtime. See, Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is very much a game of routines, and mealtime is very much one of these routines. For me, it was the last thing I'd done every day. Here, you can use whatever ingredients you have that haven't expired or that you've manually preserved to have one of your party members prepare a meal for you. Functionally, these meals restore your HP and give you perks until your hunger meter drains out, and they also present the opportunity to rest until morning. What I like most about this, though, is that your whole party partakes in eating this meal together, and they just talk. The mealtime conversations work to get a lot of important exposition and world building across, but also develops the characters and expands on their personalities. Though some people might see it as filler in some way, for me it was just warm. It was just wholesome. Maybe in part because I don't see my family very often, or because this pandemic has us all living apart and somewhat isolated. This helped me in some way or another feel like I was experiencing something that I didn't realize I'd been missing. And it just feels good, you know? A lot of this game really just feels good. It's chock full of genuinely charming and heartfelt interactions, and it shows a tremendous amount of character development throughout. Hell, even Kaimaru, the baby, gets significant and meaningful character development. This is strengthened as well by the game's wonderful script. Each character has a remarkably different way of talking that reflects their ages and their different economic and societal backgrounds. Being the diverse cast that they are, there's rarely a shortage of interesting things for them to talk about. At times, it can be a tad anachronistic, but this usually works with the lighthearted tone of most conversations. When all is said and done though, Sakuna is a story about perseverance, about working hard and earning hard, and this is an idea strongly reflected in the gameplay as well. But it's also about accountability. Accountability to yourself and to those around you. It's about owning up to your shortcomings and pushing yourself to earn your keep rather than crying about the silver spoon you think should have been yours. And above all, it's about forming meaningful relationships regardless of background. But sometimes it's also about beating the shit out of massive hordes of enemies too. So let's look at the gameplay now, starting with the easier part to explain, the combat. First, on the earlier note of routines. Thanks to the day-night cycle, for a good portion of the game, you'll find the vast majority of your combat will occur in the afternoon. Shortly after awaking, doing your farm work, and sending small children out into the wilderness to forage for materials. The reason for this is that when night falls, enemies scale up in difficulty. At that point, it becomes difficult to near impossible to take some of them on. However, some stages have objectives that need to be completed at night, so you're likely to revisit these stages at a later date. Now, combat itself is fairly simple, but the default controls are kind of ass. Thankfully, they can be remapped. So you have your light attacks and strong attacks, a jump, you have your special attack button, and your raiment, a sash of sorts that you can use in a number of ways. Your light and heavy attacks change depending on what direction you're pushing on the analog stick or D-pad. Combo chains aren't insanely long or anything, typically about 3 or 4 strikes if you're just mashing standard attacks, but they do the trick. Your light and heavy attacks will also utilize different weapons that you can either find on your journey or craft at the central hub using your gathered materials. Most weapons have 2 to 3 slots for enchantments. Some enchantments are permanently locked to a weapon or a piece of armor, while others can be swapped out. These enchantments range in effect and ability from increased money drops to additional damage depending on season or enemy type. Some others still may help you locate hidden treasure. Most enchantments can be leveled up as well by completing specific objectives. For the special attacks, those are a pretty standard set of affairs. As you level up, you unlock new combat skills. You can have 4 of these active at a time, and they come at a cost to this green meter here, which thankfully recharges pretty quickly after. The more you use a special attack, the more it will level up, improving its efficiency as you go. Your raiment is a pretty unique function. This has a few features. Like your weapons, your raiment can also get special skills that drain the same green meter. These special skills can be used to grab and throw enemies or charge into them like a ram, or even enfeeble them, lowering their defense for a short period of time. The raiment as well also works as your dodge mechanic, swinging you around and past attacking enemies. And it's used a great amount for platforming, where you can shoot it out like Spider-Man's web-slinging ability to traverse to ledges and heights that are a bit further away than you can get with your jump. These are the general tools to combat. You may have noticed I didn't mention anything about items, but that's because, as far as I could tell, there are no field consumables. Any healing you need to do while you're out and about needs to come from the benefits of whatever meal you ate the night before. Time always plays a mechanic. Whether you're racing against the oncoming night or draining your stomach, the game encourages you to find ways to act fast and aggressively. And to help you with this in combat, out of all things, it seems to take a page from Lord of Magna's playbook, the page on using enemies like bowling pins. By far the most effective and fulfilling way to get through a fight for me was to use the enemies against each other. There's something just so satisfying about seeing a massive horde descend upon you, and you give them a good home run strike straight out of existence. Combat is honestly a lot of fun, but it does have 1 or 2 areas of contention for me. Since the direction buttons indicate what moves you'll perform, I often found having to turn around in combat a bit cumbersome, frequently having to stop my attack altogether to reorient myself before I could continue. Combat is also a bit slow to really get engaging, but this is like most action RPGs. It really only feels good after you got your first few skills unlocked. These stage designs, while sometimes nice to look at, aren't always that interesting to traverse. Some utilize unique gimmicks like falling rocks, but more often than not, these tend to hurt the sense of exploration, as do some cheaply hidden treasure stashes behind walls that are frequently impossible to tell you can even pass through. By far my biggest issue though, and this affects platforming more than anything, is the raiment's lack of directional abilities or ledge magnetism. magnetism. The raiment only supports 8 directions, so you need to be really precise in how and when you throw it out. More precise than I really think benefits this game. And it can be a big source of frustration when you're racing against the clock and just need to get through a series of jumps. Balance at higher levels too is a bit weird. Towards the later chapters, I found I was so overpowered that enemies on average were only doing 1 damage to me per hit. But in the same stage, when night came around, I could only do 1 damage to them, making it seem like there was just no good time to appropriately tackle the stage to get a decent balance of difficulty. But overall, the game is a pretty easy 35-hour ride. You can probably beat the game in 30 hours playing casually, but it should take around 40 hours to complete 100%. And now comes the absurd part of Sakuna of Rice and Ruin. The rice farming. Personally, I loved this aspect of the game, but I can really see how it might not click for everybody. This shit is dense, so we're gonna walk through the stages of making rice from the beginning to the end. But it's important I note up front in this section that if this is something that might turn you off, as it is a pretty laborious task, you can leave the work to one of your village members, but at a slight cost to the potency of your yield. Though they make this an option, I wouldn't recommend this for a number of reasons. First, a lot of this game's narrative is about perseverance, working hard and earning hard. This gameplay loop reinforces those themes and improves the overall narrative experience. Second, because it's just damn rewarding to put in the work and earn your keep. And third, like it says on the back of the box, rice is power. Your harvests are what determine your level and stat increases. So you're going to want to control as much of the process as you can. And it can be fun to really dig into this and find ways to optimize your growth. The more you do it as well, the more you develop and advance your farming techniques, making each harvest more efficient than the last. And this is as much a part of the story's sense of progression as anything else. So let's start with the beginning. In keeping with the idea that Sakuna is a game all about the routines, harvesting rice has several of them. Not all of them are introduced at once, but by the midpoint of the game, every step of the process should be unlocked. Much like there is a day-night cycle, there is also a seasons and years cycle. Each season lasts for 3 in-game days and nights and will change the graphic palette of the landscape, so you're never unsure what time of year it is. Our routine typically begins around the last day of winter. At this time, we begin by using mud or salt in a mixture of water to sort out our seeds. Stirring the seeds in this compound will cause the seeds to float or sink depending on their quality. The more we sort out the bad ones, the smaller the harvest will be, but the higher quality it will be. The good seeds are then taken and sown into a soil bed to get ready in time for planting come spring. Immediately after that, usually on the same day, you start removing the rocks from your plot of soil and tilling the land. Like most processes, this is slow and laborious at first, but will only be a 30 or so second task by the end. The controls here are cumbersome and awkward, but intentionally so. It kind of gamifies the whole experience, helping it feel a little less like work, but really it is work. Once this is done, if you so desire, you can get to preparing your fertilizer. This is a massive system that you'll mostly learn through experimentation. First, you take some of your fertilizer from the outhouse. Yes, your own outhouse, and yes, I think that's kind of gross, but maybe that's just how it went down once upon a time. You take that fertilizer then to a pit where it needs to be aged prior to being ready to be spread. Once in the pit, you're given the opportunity to add additional elements to it. The triangle here represents the 3 stages of growing your rice. If you only filled in one corner, then your fertilizer will only benefit your harvest for that one period. You'll then need to swap your fertilizer out later into the growth cycle so it'll benefit the next, which further into the game you're going to be doing regularly anyway. After you filled the triangle how you see fit, you can add all number of ingredients to your poop soup. While some ingredients offer nothing but a net positive, this is very much a game of trade-offs and balances. What you add at this stage will massively impact the stats that you gain from your harvest at the end of the year. Once you got your fertilizer set, there's not much else you can do on the last day of winter. On the first day of spring, if not the second, your rice should be ready to be planted. So you take the seedlings from the storehouse and head to your field. At this point, you just walk around your field, dropping the rice as neatly as possible. This, much like tilling, is intentionally awkward, cumbersome, and time-consuming. But you'll feel the same sort of growth as you go, and it'll all be easy by the end. While planting your rice, you need to keep distance in mind, as rice too far or too close apart will make it much more difficult difficult to grow. Once the rice is planted, the water control mechanics come into play. Rice at different stages of development requires different levels of water. We have dams on either side of the soil leading to and from a river that will let the water in and out. It's important during this stage to monitor weather conditions as well, as constant rain can cause your farm to become overwatered, once again affecting the quality of your yield. Throughout this period and up until autumn, you'll be doing the same couple things every day: de-weeding and pesting your garden, fertilizing and controlling the water supply. Midway through the game, you get help in keeping pests out of your farm from what's possibly the single greatest advancement in video game history: the duck mechanic. Step aside motion graphics, step aside analog sticks or online play, Sakuna of Rice and Ruin has changed the game forever with the duck mechanic. And I mean, I actually do truly love this. It's a mechanic that largely handles itself as the ducks come out in the morning to walk or swim in your field and peck at critters. But man, it's just so adorable. Like, look at them. Look at all these little troopers just coming to do their job like the little skin canoes they are. If someday I somehow forget everything about this game except for one thing, the one thing I'm gonna remember is the ducks. I love them. Anyway. When autumn comes around, it's time for the harvest. There's not much to this, you just go to the field and start cutting. When the rice has been felled, you take the bales and hang them to dry on these little stands that often bug the camera out. Drying usually takes a day, but if there's frequent rain, it can take longer. So long as you get the rice indoor before the first frost of winter, you should be fine. Once the rice is dry, the threshing and hulling begins. These are probably the most laborious and boring tasks in the entire harvest cycle. Thankfully, as you go, you will develop tools to speed this up, but they're still kind of boring then too. Threshing is a task that you just do until you're done. It works almost like a rhythm game, only you set the rhythm and pace yourself. The larger your harvest, the longer it's gonna take. Hulling, you can stop early if you want, but you'll end up with brown rice instead of white, which grants you better food bonuses, but at a lesser stat increase. When this stage is done, your rice is done, and you get to see the fruits of your labor on this chart that outlines all the gains your harvest got you. I have made a couple bad harvests myself, but generally I felt I ended most of the year strong and felt really proud of what I pulled off. Now, despite all the stages I went over, this is still only surface level. It's possible to dive deeper and start talking about water temperatures and pest and weed effects and stuff like that, but they're not that integral to producing a good harvest. This isn't a system you're likely to master on a first or even second playthrough, but your gradual understanding of it will consistently encourage you to press on with it, try new things, and bring your old ideas to greater heights. Over the course of the game, I think I've done around 12 to 13 harvests, which is a fair bit more than I think is actually necessary, but I was having a lot of fun just biding my time, completing stage objectives, and powering up. Plus, one of my harvests were so embarrassingly poor that I refused to progress the story until I made up for it, and thankfully my next harvest done just that. But yeah, that is the rice farming. This stuff is going to take up about half of your gameplay time. If tilling soil, planting seeds, controlling water levels, and getting your poop soup in a group just isn't for you, just do it for the ducks, okay? Just do it for them. Also, just to say once more, it is optional. You can get the villagers to do it for you, but I think that would rob a lot of the experience. That's just my opinion though. Now, I played this game on Switch, so let's take a look at some of the technical aspects, as it really is a bit hit or miss. This time, we'll start with the music. I don't think it's gonna be winning any awards, and it might not end up being many people's favorite OSTs or anything, but it's pretty good. It's firmly rooted in traditional Eastern sounds and textures, and there's fleeting moments of brilliant, catchy melodies that remind me a lot of Toho music. Sound effects are pretty stock, most fit your actions and they pack a punch when they need to, but there's nothing too interesting going on in terms of sound design. Voiceovers sadly run into a bit more issues on the Switch. While it took some getting used to, I did warm up to the English cast, but the voiceovers themselves seemed either overdriven or compressed, and ranging in quality from line to line and actor to actor.
The sting of that horrible comment sobered me right up. I suppose I'll return to the banquet and reacquaint myself with the joy of intoxication.
I am Katsura Uemon no Jo Takamori.
I'm Kinta. Who are you?
I'm Yui. I don't like it here.
I'm Mirte, and this is... Kaimuru!
Like many niche games this past year, I feel I have to extend some benefit of the doubt and say this could be a result of the ongoing pandemic and work conditions. But I really don't know for sure. It's not a huge deal, but it is rather unfortunate. Thankfully, if it's too much of a deal, there is a Japanese voice track as well. Annoyingly though, there's no auto text progression in this game. Visuals are easily the biggest mixed bag, but just remember, once again, this is on Switch. I've seen other versions of this in motion and they are quite a bit cleaner. So suffice to say the least, the visuals have obvious shortcomings. Low-res textures tend to make some environments look far more muddy than they should. In certain locations with far draw distance, the frame rate can get a tiny bit sluggish, especially in your central hub when you have a large harvest growing. Some animations are a bit jank in cutscenes, but it's usually kind of more cute than it is a problem, so I'm fine with the obvious budgetary constraints there. Shadows and lighting on character models is a frequent issue. Quite often the game just doesn't seem to know how to generate them and it causes flickering patches of shadow all over them. This was really distracting at first, and though I eventually got used to it, it never looked good. And there's also some issues with environment detection. On more than one occasion, I clipped enemies into walls and got myself stuck inside of them a few times as well, which wouldn't normally be a big deal if I wasn't racing against the clock and if it wasn't necessary in some battles to defeat every enemy to progress. Also, I got stuck in the wall once and then died of poison. Wasn't too happy about that one. Now, you and the enemies can always get out, but the question is, how long is it gonna take and can you survive until then? Other things like these floating water bubbles took a bit of a visual hit on Switch, but let's not give the impression that it's all bad. It's far from it. Most of the time, things are running great. And visually, there's a lot to like here too. I like the character designs and how distinct they all are. I like the look of the central hub and how it's so small but has all you need in it. The Lofty Realm has a distinct Spirited Away Studio Ghibli kind of look to it. I like a lot of the unique boss designs. Though they seem inspired by traditional representations of legendary beasts, they still often have an air of originality about them. The skyboxes are particularly a nice sight to behold, especially at night. The glow of the moon and the individual constellations, it feels good. It's just more of that feel-good stuff. The color palettes and changes from season to season, as well as the weather effects, all do a lot to sell you on the feeling of this taking place in a nice, cozy world that's almost fairy tale-like. But then this also feels a lot like a fairy tale, or even one of Aesop's fables turned into a long-form adventure. Slow and steady wins the race, hard work builds character, etc., etc. At the end of the day, Sakuna of Rice and Ruin, while bringing to mind other familiar games like Little Dragon's Cafe and such, still feels, as a whole, quite unlike anything I've played before. It delivers strong in the messages it wants to get across and weaves the point of the narrative into the gameplay so directly that it's sure to leave a lasting impression on anybody who gives it the time of day. The combat is fun and frantic, and the bite-sized nature of each activity and the routines-oriented nature of its gameplay loops made it an excellent game to have on the go. I got a lot more than I bargained for out of Sakuna, and it's a wild experiment I'm happy to see somebody was crazy and trusting enough to invest in. And I openly recommend it to anybody who's not turned off by a bit of slice of life time wasting and really deep farming mechanics dedicated to only one single type of crop. And that's all I'm gonna say on Sakuna of Rice and Ruin, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys liked this video, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all of my socials and my Patreon support page are in the description below, and as always, folks, thanks for watching.